is also controlled by this oculomotor nerve. So this number one, the functions mainly are the eye movements, then the regulating the size of the pupil and functions. These are all functions of the eye. So number one, it is the olfactory nerve. Number two, it is the optic nerve. Then number three, it is the oculomotor nerve. Then number four, the trochlear nerve. Now, it is the nerve that mainly emerge from the cells in the middle portion of the brain, and the motor fibers extends from the trochlear nerve to the superior oblique muscles of the eye. So, it is also related with the eye movements, and this nerve is responsible for mediating the movements of the eye and also making movements, motor movements. That means it has some complex function. That means the movement of the eye, mediating the movements of the eye as well as the motor movements. So this is number four, that is the trochlear nerve. Then comes number five, that is the trigeminal nerve. Now this trigeminal nerve can be divided into three kinds of nerves. Number one, it is the ophthalmic nerve. Number two, it is the maxillary nerve. And number three, the mandibular nerve. Now, there are some sensory neurons in these three kinds of nerves. So, the main function of these type of neurons is to carry the impulses from the skin, the mucosa of the head and teeth to the cell bodies in the trigeminal ganglion. So we have already studied about the ganglia in the previous chapter in the central nervous system. So they have actually the mixed function. That means number one, the sensation in the head and face, as well as the jaw movement, the chewing of anything, and the movement of the muscles in the jaw, etc. So these have some complex functions. Now, what is proprioception? Let me tell you that it is the sense through which the person perceives the position and movements of one's body. So that is, this includes the sense equilibrium and balance. That means the balancing of the body. So that is the proprioception. And this next one, it is the number 6 cranial nerve. It is the abducens nerve. Now this abducens nerve, it is mainly responsible for the it originates in the pons region of the brain, and it is responsible for the motor movement and functions. That means movement of the legs, maybe movement of the shoulder, etc. And then comes the facial nerve, that is the number 7 nerve, and the facial nerve has the motor fibers, and these fibers help to secrete number 1, the saliva in the mouth, and are involved in making facial expression, maybe tears, maybe tests, how we express by some tests or some facial expression of love, affection, all the emotions, etc. So these are controlled by this facial nerve. Then comes the next one, that is the number 8 nerve, that is the vestibular nerve. So see, the number 8, it is the vestibular nerve. It is actually responsible for the auditory, for the hearing, and it is the nerve in the auditory. Mainly it is situated in the auditory nerve, and it is divided into 2 parts. Number 1, the vestibular nerve, and number 2, the cochlear nerve. Now these are responsible for the hearing, maintaining the body balance, etc. So This is the number 8 nerve. Then comes the glossopharyngeal nerve, that is number 9 nerve. Now this glossopharyngeal nerve is made up of both, it is a mixture of sensory and the motor fibers. So it has a complex function. That means it sends impulses to the tongue for taste, then throat, and is involved for swallowing anything, then sensations of the tongue, that means maybe the sensation of bitter, sour, salty, etc. Then secretions of the saliva, and it also helps in the body blood pressure and respiration too. So see, there is a complex function of this glossopharyngeal nerve. And after that, number 10, it is the vagus nerve. Now, while you will study this, you just write all the names of this nerve and the numbers side by side, and just remember the functions of this nerve. Okay. So if you get any question like describe the cranial nerves, describe or define the cranial nerves and give the functions, then you have to mention all the names of the nerves, then the number of the nerves, and just you have to write the functions of each nerve side by side, right? So this type of question is very common in this part of this chapter. Now then comes this vagus nerve that I told you. That is, it is a mixture of the sensory and the motor fibers. Now number 11, it is the accessory nerve. Now mainly it is the motor nerve. That means the movement. It controls the movement. So some of its fibers originate in the medulla and extend to the thoracic and abdominal viscera. So as well as the pharynx and larynx. So all of this, number 1, it is the thoracic part, then control of the thoracic part and the abdominal viscera, as well as the pharynx and the larynx. So it has also a complex function. So hence this nerve is considered as an accessory to the vagus nerve. So since it has spinal components, it was earlier also known as spinal accessory nerve. So the other name of this type of nerve is the spinal accessory nerve, because it has some specific spinal components. So these nerve is responsible for number 1, the movement of the shoulder, then turning of the head, then movements of the viscera, then voice production and proprioception that I told you just now. So this is all about the accessory nerve. Now next come the hypoglossal nerve. Now what is that? It is mainly, number 1, it is the number 12 nerve of cranial nerves, and this motor fibers in the hypoglossal nerve, it extends to the tongue muscles. So that means it helps to talk. That means the movement of the tongue muscles and how we respond to a particular taste of any food. So that is controlled by this type of nerve. So this nerve is responsible for the movements made by the tongue. So for speaking anything, we actually move the tongue. So that is also controlled by this type of hypoglossal nerve. Now next come the spinal nerves. So it is another type of nerves. So it has mainly 31. They are 31 in number, the spinal nerves, and these nerves emerge from the spinal cavity and are known according to the level of vertebral column from which they emerge. Now these they arise from the cervical vertebrae, so they are known as cervical nerve pairs. So sometimes instead of spinal nerves, there are some questions like what is cervical nerve pairs? So then you have to understand that you have to write about the spinal nerves. Okay. So these are 8 in number and labeled as C1 through C8. So there are only 8 in numbers and it starts from C1 through C8. Now the nerves arising from the vertebra in the thoracic region are known as the thoracic nerve pairs, and those are 12 in numbers are known as T1 through T12. So you have to remember like this C1 through C8 and T1 through T12. There are 5 nerves that emerge from the vertebra in the lumbar area known as the lumbar nerve pairs. Now these are also you have to remember by capital L1 through capital L5, that is L1 through L5. Now these nerves arising from the sacral vertebra are 5 in number and are known as sacral nerve fibers. Then this S1 through S5. So I'm just recollecting all the names from the beginning of the spinal nerves. Number 1, it starts from the 8 pairs, that is C1 through C8, then 12 in number, it starts from T1 through T12, then 5 nerves L1 through L5, and then another 5 sacral vertebra, another 5 nerves that starts from S1 to S5. Okay, so the last one is known as the coccygeal pair of spinal nerve in the coccyx region or tip of the spinal cord. Okay, so then we will start from this somatic nervous system, the next part of this chapter. Now, what do you mean by the soma? The word soma means body. Okay, so this, as you have seen that what are the different nerves, the cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Now here we will see that what or how many types or the structural and functional systems of this somatic nervous system. Now this somatic nervous system, it conducts mainly the number 1, the sensory, and number 2, the motor information from the brain and spinal cord, that means the CNS. So it is responsible for all the voluntary movements, and this system consists of 2 major types of neurons. They are number 1, the sensory, and number 2, the motor neurons that I have already told just now. So this the sensory neuron are afferent neurons, and they conduct the impulses from the sensory organ to the central nervous system. Now there are some or you know that when a predictable response is given to a stimulus, it is known as reflex. Okay, so in the reflex, the nerve impulse, it passes over a reflex arc, and there are some specific reflexes. Let me tell you that number 1, the cranial reflex, and number 2, the spinal reflex. Now from the name, you can know that the center of the reflex arc is in the brain. So it is known as the cranial reflex, while in the center of the reflex arc is in the spinal cord, so it is known as the spinal reflex. Now, this somatic reflexes, it involves some contraction of the skeletal muscles. So it is number 1 function, and The autonomic or visceral reflexes also, it consists of contractions of smooth cardiac muscles or the glandular secretion. That is it has the both functions. That is the number one, the movement of this smooth cardiac muscles and the secretion or the glandular secretion. Now, during some investigations, testing the reflexes is a very important diagnostic tool. Now, if there is any deviation from the knee jerk or any ankle jerk or any corneal, that means eye reflex, or some any other disease, or due to some any other disease, then what happens? Say for example, the knee jerk reflex is known as the patellar reflex. So there are some specific names given to each and every reflexes. So it involves the muscles of the lower leg. And the other examples of this knee jerk reflex are spinal cord reflex, when the center of the reflex arc is in the spinal cord. That means the segmental reflex, when the nerve impulses emerge and the end in the same segment of the spinal cord. It's lateral reflex that occurs from the same side of the body, or stretch reflex, also known as the myotatic reflex. The myotatic reflex. You don't have to go in detail, but if you get a short note on the somatic nervous system, then just you mention the name of these reflexes, okay, and mention the functions according to the marks of the question, right? So these reflex that are produced by the lower leg extensors are called the extensor reflex, and those produced by tapping of a tendon as the tendon reflex. So this reflex that is produced when the achilles tendon, it is another name, that is tapped and is known as the ankle jerk. Or then likewise there may be some abdominal reflex also. It is also described here. See, the corneal reflexes involve the blinking movement, for example, then which occurs when the cornea is touched. Then the same thing happens in the abdominal reflex, that is the side of the abdomen is touched, the walls of the abdomen move, producing an abdominal reflex. So these are all about reflexes. So in your study material, you can see that page 79, there are some pictures, that is figure 4.4. See, the plantar reflex or the Babinski sign. So it is another type of reflex abnormalities, and this is an absent Babinski reflex, means it gives the stability of the infant's body and preparing their feet to take the first step, and it even ensures a proper coordination between the hips. That means how we sit in a place, how to coordinate that, yes, in this place how we will sit, then the lower limbs, and also how we put our spine straight. So all of this type of movements and reflexes. Now when newborns have no Babinski reflex, it suggests that their CNS has not matured properly, or there is some problem in their spinal cord. So it is this absence of Babinski reflex. Then the retained Babinski reflex. Now when children continue to have this infantile reflex even after reaching the age of 2 years, then they will have difficulty in placing their feet on the ground with ease. That means they may easily fall down. So there is a problem in stepping down, and they may also face a problem in balancing themselves, as this toe will always be extended outwards making it problematic for them to walk around comfortably. So this retention of this Babinski reflex may also cause this type of problems. So absence of Babinski reflex, also there is some problems, and this mainly the retention of this Babinski reflex, the problems are mainly toe walking, flat feet, difficulty in paying attention or concentration, weakened ankles, and that person may fall down and being inclined to extend or contract feet while walking, then might have a claw or hammered toe, etc. Now, another problem that is children detected with cerebral palsy or hemiplegia, that is the partial paralysis of the body. So, it will retain their reflexes on the part that has been affected. So, the babies suffering from mainly the ASD that you all know, the autism, also have this prolonged Babinski reflex. So there are some specific shoe that helps them to walk. So there is a problem in walking, in jumping, in putting the steps, etc. So the skeletal muscles are called the voluntary muscles, but can move when a reflex response occurs. So they are called the voluntary because they can be moved at will and are not limited to that kind of movement. Now this is the mainly what the main structures and functions of this somatic nervous system. So here you have to mention all the reflexes and what are the problems of these reflexes, etc. Then comes the autonomic nervous system, that is the ANS. Now this ANS is that part of the peripheral nervous system that helps to transmit the efferent neurons to various automatic or visceral effectors. So, as the name automatic or autonomic suggests that the functions are more or less they are automatic. That means we cannot control these type of functions according to our own will. So, it helps to regulate the effectors. That means the cardiac muscles in the heart, the smooth muscles on the skin, the blood vessels, the epithelial tissues, and all the functions of these glands, the hormonal glands, the pituitary glands, etc. So thus, the somatic nervous system, it controls the senses and voluntary muscles. Now, let me move to the next slide. Yes. So, the ANS function is, it involves the number one, regulating the heart rate. Then, number two, the contraction of smooth muscles in the gallbladder and urinary bladder, and maintain a state of homeostasis by regulating the glandular secretions. Now, homeostasis means all the organs are working in a smooth manner without any difficulty and maintaining the body balance, and hence the ANS, it regulates the autonomic effectors that not only help to maintain the homeostasis but also it restores it. Now, ANS is divided into two main divisions, or it has two divisions mainly, that is the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. So, here the very important question comes that what are the differences of this sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Then you have to mention the functions, what are the functional difference as well as what are the structural differences of these. Okay, so these two divisions are very different from one another but work in conjunction with each other. Okay, so there is definitely a relation between these two divisions, but actually their functions are distinct or separate. Now, this parasympathetic nervous system, the first and foremost important function is it constricts the pupils of the eye. So, number one, constricts the pupils of the eye. Number two, it stimulates the salivation. So, number two, it stimulates the salivation in the mouth, and that means it helps in digestion, in swallowing anything. And number three, it stimulates, number three, it slows the heart rate. That means there is a fixed rhythm. So that rhythm is controlled by this parasympathetic nervous system. It always slows the heart rate, and next function is the constricts bronchi. It constricts the bronchi or the bronchial region. So that means the pipe, the esophagus that comes and connects with the bronchial region. So that particular region, it always constricts the bronchi, and then comes the next function, that is it stimulates digestion. It always stimulates digestion, and it causes the bladder control. That means the movement of the bladder control, it makes the urination. That means it controls the excretory system, that is the bladder control. Now, the next type of this autonomic nervous system, that is the sympathetic nervous system. Now, these are the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system that I told you just now. Now, what are the functions of sympathetic nervous system? Number one, it dilates the pupil. See, the parasympathetic nervous system, number one function was constrict the pupil, whereas the sympathetic nervous system, it dilates the pupil. So these are the differences between these two nervous systems. Now, next one, it inhibits salivation. Okay, whereas the function of parasympathetic nervous system was number two, it stimulates the salivation. Then number three, it is the increase the heart rate and dilates the bronchi. So these are also different. See, in the parasympathetic nervous system, what happens? It stimulates the salivation, whereas sympathetic nervous system, it inhibits the salivation, and parasympathetic nervous system, it always slows the heart rate, whereas the sympathetic nervous system, it increases the heart rate, and it dilates the bronchi, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system, it constricts the bronchi. So just the opposite functions of these two nervous systems. Then it inhibits digestion, the sympathetic nervous system, whereas in the parasympathetic nervous system, the function is it stimulates the digestion. And lastly, it inhibits the contraction of the bladder, that means the movement of the urine. Okay, so these are the main differences between these two nervous systems. Now, let me tell you in brief what are the, so almost I have done with this peripheral nervous system. So these are all differences between the two. So this is a very important question for you. So please prepare this, the differences between these two. Now let me start with the next chapter, that is the brain lateralization, the hemispheric specialization. So just a minute. I am sharing this PPT with you. Okay. So this hemispheric specialization. So what do you mean by this? Actually, this term. Let me tell you. Uh, the next slide, you can see that a person who mainly writes or uses his or her right hand. So that person is known as dextrals, Dextrals. And there are some persons who prefer the left hand in writing, in eating, in playing anything, etc. So they are known as the sinistrals, and so these are the two main right-handed and left-handed persons. So they are named as this, and there are some persons in tiny fractions, they can use both their right and left hand simultaneously. They are known as the ambidextral. So these are all due to the functions of our hemispheric specialization, that is the left and the right hemisphere of our brain. Now, this left and right hemisphere, these are both actually the functions are mainly similar, but one hemisphere is dominant on another. So that is uh, actually the opposite connections are there. That means it is a general conception that human being has one brain, but automatically our brain consists of two structures. As you all know, that is, it is a bilaterally symmetrical. So the structure left of the cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere, and these hemispheres have contralateral, that is the opposite connection. Contralateral, the opposite connection with the rest of the body. That means the left section or left hemisphere of the brain, it actually it is the control center of the right hand side of our body, and whereas the right hemisphere of our brain, it is actually the control section of the left side of our body. Now, these hemispheres are separate from each other, and but they do exchange some informations, and there are some channels between these two. So these channels are known as the corpus callosum. Now, these corpus callosum is made up of some set of axons which connects the right and the left hemispheres together. Now, there are some other channels also for the communication between these two hemispheres. So, they are the anterior commissure, the hippocampal commissure, the massa commissure, the posterior commissure, and the optic chiasm. So, if you see, there is a diagram or there is a figure in page 88 of your study material of biopsychology. There you can see that all the regions, see the hippocampal commissure and the posterior commissure, the corpus callosum, the massa intermedia, then the anterior commissure and the optic chiasm. So these are the main location of these channels. Okay. Now this these hemispheres are similar in structure but not similar in function. Why? Because left hemisphere, they possesses some superiority in certain functions over the right hemisphere. Whereas similarly, the right hemisphere is specialized over left in other some cognitive functions like thinking, memory, perception, sensations, etc. And this difference in the specialization of the function of hemisphere is known as the hemispheric specialization or the lateralization of function. Now, earlier, it was believed that our left hemisphere has some dominant role over the right hemisphere in controlling everything, mainly the cognitive functions or processes. But this thinking led to the development of the theory known as the cerebral dominance. And as a result of this theory, the left hemisphere was often termed as the dominant hemisphere, while the right hemisphere was called as the minor hemisphere. So this is the main, or you sometimes there is some common question that which is the dominant hemisphere? Give some examples, or what are the functions of this dominant hemisphere and minor hemisphere? Then you have to differentiate between these two hemispheres, how they are related with each other, and what are the main differences also between these two hemispheres. Now, what led to the development of the theory of cerebral dominance? Let us see. Now, before moving further, it is important to discuss this cerebral dominance. Why? Because one can attribute the development of this theory, that is the cerebral dominance, into two prominent names. What are they? Paul Broca and Hugo Carl Lippmann. In 1864, a French physician, anatomist, and anthropologist, Paul Broca reported that all his aphasia patients had damage to their inferior prefrontal cortex of the left hemisphere, and now this area is termed as Broca's area. Right? Now, what is this aphasia means? See, it is given in your study material. Aphasia, it is the inability to produce or comprehend the speech after any brain damage or brain injury or any accident or due to some tumor. Now, there is another type of problem, that is the apraxia. So, that is the problem or inability to perform the voluntary physical movement due to some brain injury, maybe due to some accident, or due to some viral attack, bacterial attack, tumor, etc. So, this is made, this I was telling about this Broca's area. So this made this Broca, the name, this is known, this area is known by the name of this anatomist or physician, Paul Broca. So this made him conclude that left hemisphere is responsible for the language ability specifically, and similarly Hugo Carl Lippmann in 1900, he reported that apraxia also had damage on left hemisphere. So both of them said that the left hemisphere is responsible for the language ability, and in later in Carl Lippmann's research, he reported that the apraxia also had some damage on due to some damage on the left hemisphere. Now, these major breakthroughs suggested that left hemisphere plays a key role in controlling the language, the voluntary motor activities, and they laid the foundation of the theory of this cerebral dominance. So, if you get any short questions, maybe 2 or 3 marks, so you have to write that what is this theory of cerebral dominance. You have to mention these two name of this physiologist and what were their findings, okay, and what is aphasia and apraxia. Now, the next slide, um, see, there is some difference between the left and the right hemisphere. Now, let me tell you what are the differences. Now, left hemisphere dominance is words. That means pronunciation of some words, specific words or letters, and whereas the right hemisphere dominance is faces. That means everything, the movement of the faces, the uh, or showing some emotions, etc. Then geometric patterns, and the emotional expression that I told you. That means everything that deals with the faces. So that is the right hemisphere dominance. Now, in audition, the left hemisphere dominance is also on language or sound that we produce, and the right hemisphere dominance is the non-language sounds or music or any rhythm, etc. So that music, what do you mean by music? That has some specific rhythm, right? So that is the right hemisphere dominance. Then comes touch. So there is no specific dominance of left hemisphere in touch, but in the right hemisphere dominance, it is the tactile patterns and the barely. So these are the two main regions that are controlled by this right hemisphere dominance. And then comes the movement. Movement, the left hemisphere dominance, it is the complex movement, all the complex movement, and the epicilateral movement. The epicilateral movement and the in the right hemisphere, the movement in the spatial pattern. Movement in the spatial pattern. Now, this next part, next one is the memory. So that means the cognitive aspects. So memory, the left hemisphere dominance, it is the verbal memory, finding meaning in memories, and in the right hemisphere dominance, it is all the non-verbal memory, maybe any picture, maybe any sound, any rhythm, any music, etc. And the perceptual aspects of memories also. It also adds the perceptual aspects of memories. Then comes the specifically the language. So the language, it in the left hemispheric dominance, it starts with the speech, that is the reading, writing, arithmetic, that is mainly the 3 R's, and the right hemispheric dominance is the emotional content. That means anger, hatred, love, affection, etc. Then the spatial ability, the right hemispheric dominance, there is no such mention here, that it is not, the left hemispheric dominance is not present in the spatial ability, whereas the right hemispheric dominance, there is a mental rotation of shapes. That means the geometry, the direction, the distance, all of these things. So this is the main difference between the left and the right hemisphere. So while you will write the question like what are the differences between this left and right hemisphere, then you will just draw a line in between and see there is a table 5.1. You just try to write like this. Then you will mention the functions on the extreme left side, then the left hemisphere dominance and the right hemisphere dominance. Okay, so maybe this type of question carries 3 marks, sometimes 4, not more than that. So you will have to write the differences like this, right? Now, then comes the now let me tell you what is the language dominance just before I start the cutting the corpus callosum or the split brain. Let me tell you what is the language dominance. Now, language dominance is the ability for which the cerebral lateralization was discovered, That means that I told you about the Paul Broca in 1864, and in his seminal work mentioned the correlation between the left hemisphere, the aphasia, and suggesting a dominance of left hemisphere over right hemisphere in only the language ability part. Okay. And what is the ipsilateral movement? It is opposite of contralateral is ipsilateral. So it is a specific name given to this movement, and it means on the same side. So actually it means on the same side, and it is a well established fact that our hemispheres are contralaterally connected to our body parts. That is the left hemisphere, it controls the right part that I told you just before, and the right hemisphere, it controls the left body part. So if a person is paralyzed due to some stroke or some cerebral problem, then if there is some blockage on the right hemisphere of the brain, then there is a problem in movement of the right hand side of that patient. Okay, so, and just the opposite, if there is a blockage or hemorrhage in the left portion, then there is a problem in the right portion of that patient, portion of the body. So, however, in 1996, Halland and Harrington first observed in their fMRI. You know what is fMRI? I told you in the first chapter of this biopsychology. So, fMRI study that complex, it is a way of imaging the brain structures and functions. Okay. So, this cognitive movement performed by one hand led to usual contralateral activation along with apicilateral activation of the hemisphere. Now, this apicilateral hemispheric activation was found to be greater in the left side or left hemisphere in comparison to the right hemisphere. So you have seen that the left hemisphere is very much important, as there are various functions of this left hemisphere, and so if there is any problem in the left hemisphere of the brain, then that person will not be able to walk, or motor movements are restricted, movements in swallowing, in any other sense organ, and maybe in sometimes the patient sometimes dies due to this type of paralysis. Now, it means that any damage to this left hemisphere will affect the left hand movement more in comparison to the effect of the damage of the right hemisphere on right-handed movements. Okay, so if I prefer to write with my right hand or eat with my right hand, then what happens? There is an if any damage to the left hemisphere will affect the left-handed movements. Okay, so that person who prefer to write or eat with the left hand, so that person more in the comparison to the effect of the damage of the right hemisphere on right-handed movements. Then what is spatial ability? Levy in 1969 found in her study that in the context of the spatial abilities, it means the space. That means the spatial perception, the direction, any geometrical shapes or any distance. So specifically spatial ability covers all these direction, perception of any space, or any geometrical figure or distance. Then comes the emotional ability. That means the numerous studies have suggested that our right hemisphere is better in decoding the emotional cues than the left hemisphere. So there are some specific functions in the right hemisphere, and in the recent studies by Etkoff and his colleagues in 2000, they found that people with left hemisphere lessons were more accurate in reading gestures, facial expressions, and detecting light than the normal population. So see, it is very interesting part. So this was the findings of this research. So they found that the left hemisphere, if there is any problem in the left hemisphere uh, or any hemispheric lessons occur, then what happens? They were more accurate in reading gestures, in some specific facial expressions, and they can detect the light than any other normal population. So this suggests that people with aphasia are better at detecting a liar because of their damaged left hemisphere. Okay, so a person who has this aphasia, they are better at detecting a liar because of their damage in the left hemisphere, and thus they are free to use the right hemisphere and make some reliable judgments. So further, it has also been reported that damage to the right hemisphere, it prevents an individual from comprehending people's emotional expression. That means if a person is crying, so I just observe that yes, that person may some have some problems, so that person is crying, or he or she is sad due to some reason. So that part is absent absolutely, right? So it has also been reported that damage to right hemisphere, it prevents an individual from comprehending people's emotional expressions, including humor and sarcasm. So this was a research work by Beeman and Chiarello in 1998. Then comes the musical ability. So the musical ability, it was another research work by Kimura in 1964. So using the dichotic listening task, he reported that our right hemisphere is always superior in musical ability. So a person who can sing very well, maybe the right hemisphere is more dominant because it is responsible for this musical ability. Now, many other studies on patients with damage in the right hemisphere are consistent with the findings of Kimura, and that is the right hemisphere lessons disrupts the musical ability of such patients. That means that person will not able to understand any specific rhythm or etc. This type of musical ability is absolutely absent to this type of patients. Now, differences in memory. Now, studies have suggested that both of our hemispheres have memory ability. That means the right and the left hemispheres both are responsible for this memory ability. But however, the types of memory in which these hemispheres specialize, they differ from each other. So it was another research work by Kelly's in 2002. And it said that our left hemisphere, it plays a major role in the verbal memory hemispheres, whereas right hemisphere plays a greater role in non-verbal memory, that means gestures, etc. Okay, so this is the main dominance, the language dominance, the ipsilateral movement, the spatial ability, the emotional ability, the musical ability, and the differences in the memory. Now, the next portion is cutting the corpus callosum or the split brain. that you have already submitted in the assignment. What is split brain? And there was a um, video, and you have to write about the split brain patient, right? So I think it is 12:10. I have to stop here, and next day I will continue with this split brain in humans, and after that I will jump to the next portion, that is the gland and behavior, the endocrine system. So this is the last chapter of this biopsychology. And after I finish this, I will start with 103, right? Or maybe 106. I don't know. That I have to ask the office about this. Okay.
And next, madam, next class 103.
Okay, 103. Okay.
103.
So that means I will start 103 in next class. I think I will be able to finish the endocrine glands, and after that I have to start the next chapter. Okay.
When is the next class?
Next Thursday. Next Thursday.
হ্যাঁ, লিংকটা তৈরি হবে, লিংকটা পাঠিয়ে দেওয়া হবে। লিংক পাঠিয়ে দেওয়া হবে নেক্সট উইকে মানডে বা টুইসডেতে লিংক করে পাঠিয়ে দেওয়া হবে।
So this is all about this peripheral system. So yes, Srija, Devraj, I will take the questions next day. Today I think I am already late. So please, you prepare this. I will ask you some questions also on this peripheral nervous system and CNS. I will just randomly select one of you and I will ask some short questions. So please go through these chapters. Okay?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello.
Devansh. Yes, Devansh.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Devansh. Yes.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. I'm talking what the question patterns for psychology in IGNOU. I don't have much idea.
Okay, so you can see there are some questions.
Hello.
Yes. Hello. So you can see the pattern, mainly the question pattern from the previous year's question. Okay. So I will send you some
Basically,
links.
it shows on 10 marks question.
Yes, there are some options. You have to do some 10. There are some questions of like group A. You have to do 3 questions, or yes, 3 questions. That is one. That is 3 questions of 30 marks, I think. So there are some options also.
Okay.
Then some question it carries 6 marks. From 6 options you have to do 4. And there are some very short questions of 3 marks. So there are also some options you can select. So you have to do 2 from the very short questions. Mainly 3 marks each. Okay, so this is mainly the pattern of your question paper. So you will have 50 marks.
Okay, ma'am.
Full marks is 50. So you just see the previous year's question. I will send you some link from there. You can see and have an idea about the questions. Okay. And I will always tell you that you please go through the see, there are some questions given in the back side of each chapter. That means go through the summary portion, the keywords. See, these are the definitions of all the terms that are there present in the chapters, and the review questions. Always you do this. After I complete this chapter, you please do this at your home. So from there only you will find the questions. Okay.
Ma'am, can you refer or recommend some good refreshers or
Yes,
something?
yes, you can study from C.C. Chatterjee. I told you in the previous class. It is a book of medical. You can refer from there. Hmm. So C.C.
Which book,
Chatterjee,
ma'am?
or yes,
CC Chatterjee.
C.C. Chatterjee. Yes, and there are some other human uh, some books on human brain. You can find it out if you search in the library, or uh, you can find in the Google also on human brain. So specifically, you can study from there, or um, there are some books like MUNN, Introduction to Psychology. So there, from there also you can study, or P.N. Bhattacharya. So there are three sections of this book. So in the first section, it covers about all the structures of eye, ear, brain, all the systems, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, etc. Okay. So thank you.
Ma'am, C.C. Chatterjee, it is about human physiology.
Yes, yes. It's a medical book actually. So there you can study this structure of brain, the CNS, autonomic nervous system. Hmm. Okay. So thank you everybody.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, Kritika.
Ma'am, will you be having classes for the elective courses too?
Actually, I don't know. You have to ask the office regarding this. Hmm. If you have any questions regarding psychology, I can tell you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Please go through the chapters. Next class, I will ask
Thank you,
you some
ma'am.
questions. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.